presentation this morning is based on my personal experience, but also from the experience of a group of a research group, the Service Design Lab, which is more or less all those people here that you can see, and in particular the work that we have synthesized in a book. When I say we, I say me, Amalia, my colleague Amalia de Goetzen, and Luca Simeone. We've been working on a master on service design here at Aalborg University since 2012, and we found that one of the issues that were coming out were the definition of the capability of a service designer. We will come back to this concept. And so we synthesized this in this book that is simply called Service Design Capabilities. And it was a book in which we were wondering what should one expect from a service designer? And for this reason, I also asked the same question to you before starting. And I would like to know from you, first of all, whether you have worked with service designers. I know this question is difficult to make on Zoom, because if we were in a room, we would say, okay, raise your hand. But you cannot raise your hand, otherwise I will understand that everybody wants to talk, and that's not the case. But I hope that some of you answer to my initial questions. What capabilities, if you work with service designers, of course, if you are not a service designer, but if you are a service designer, if you understand what kind of capability were service designers expected to have in those collaborations, and what did you ask service designers to do? I don't know if I can see the replies. I can see one reply from Jonas, knowledge in ethnographic methods, for instance, and this is quite interesting because it catches the one of the proximity of service design to ethnographic and sociological studies. Then understand the user perspective and curiosity and open mind and broad perspective, flexibility and knowledge in municipality. So clearly someone working in a municipality, understanding system thinking, a critical viewpoint bottom up, yes, and be the user advocate and research their needs. So these user-centeredness, visualization skills, understanding the organizational needs and pain points, creativity. Are there other comments? Data literacy, okay. Empathy and facilitation, visualization, holistic perspective, including business aspects, design user-friendly services. Yes. This last one was about probably asking the second question, what did you ask service designers to do for you? So, I mean, do you have indications of when service designers were employed, for instance, in municipality we saw before, what kind of projects were they, or what kind of work they were asked to do? Workshop with a lot of different stakeholders, yes. User research, user journey, mapping, workshop to get the employment to use design thinking as a method, looking for ways to design new service in healthcare, visualize complex systems, Okay. Other facilitation, reiteration of a digital service, interesting, and co-design and co-create service blueprint. Yes. So blueprinting is service blueprinting, visualizing concepts. Maybe the very last one. No one else. User testing. Okay. Storytelling. Yes. Yes. This is interesting because we saw that there were many different areas of competence, and perhaps it's I can already see a little difference between this kind of very short survey we've done now and a survey we have done a couple of years ago, because a couple of years ago, let me see if I can come back to my, yeah, a couple of years ago, we didn't have a chance to make a survey like that, but we went around on all the calls for positions concerning service design, or positions that our student had taken as service designers. And in fact, we found that very few of them, or almost no one, was actually mentioning service design in the advertisement. So the position advertised was UX designer, interaction designer, experience designer, in healthcare, something related to system design, but almost none of them was saying we are looking for a service designer. And this was quite interesting for us also, because for our master, we were trying to understand how our students could be employed once they ended the course. And we found out that basically we could describe this phenomenon with a sort of donut, where the competence that described service designers were actually not describing the core, the center of service design. They were only describing a number of competence capabilities that here I just mentioned few of them, competence and capabilities that were sort of consistent with the professional service design and service designer, but they were not actually describing exactly what the company wanted from service designers. And this is one first point, one of the first point of the ground for writing the book I was mentioning before. Another point that we consider was the fact that our students were looking at a number of tools, toolkits, and so on. And there were several, and there are even more now, service design tools, toolkits, pages, web pages, online repository, and so on, with all those toolkits. But we, as it happened for design thinking, service design was about to become a sort of buzzword, like design thinking, and there was the risk that to give the impression that if you have a toolkit, you can become a service designer. So if I give you all the tools for that service designer usually use for their in their daily job, you can become a service designer. It's like saying that if you have all the recipes and the ingredients, you can become a good cook. And of course, this was for us was not true. Otherwise, we wouldn't have created a service design master, but it's also quite intuitive, because the question is that for a cook, you know, a good cook has to have some knowledge beyond the cookbooks, the capability to find the right spice, the right ingredient. And this comes from the capability to navigate across the various recipes and to combine ingredients, and also depends on their own personal cooking techniques, and also how those techniques can be related to taste, concept, context, and situation. And if we apply the same criteria to service designer, the question becomes, are those toolkits enough to make a good service designer, or what do service designer need to complement, need to have to complement the knowledge they get from the various toolkits? And so what we try to do, and also the structure of this presentation, is to give you a perspective, so that investigates a sort of logical gap that has been part of the history of service design in the last decade, I would say. A map that describes different logical level in which service designers are working, and some navigation tools that are actually the service design capabilities, the capabilities the service designers need to have to handle those tools and toolkits. Let's start with the perspective. And the perspective comes from some consideration about who designs, but also whether we design something or we design for something. And I will explain those concepts. Who design, first of all? The obvious starting point is the definition by Herbert Simon, that everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situation into preferred ones. This was Herbert Simon in The Science of Artificial. And this is one of the most commonly accepted definition of design in general. And this definition is actually highlighting that design is in fact a capability to create something new on the basis of our own knowledge and competences. And this means that design is probably not just the capability of some experts that have studied design for many years in schools and can propose clever solutions. Is also the capability of everybody when defining, you know, in everyday life, when defining solutions to everyday life, like, you know, how I came to my office this morning, considering that it was raining and there was traffic. It requires some sort of problem-solving capability that also must be meaningful for me. But if everybody can design, for those who are familiar with Ezio Manzini, you know that now I'm going on his territory. But if everybody can design, so we should probably revise also the concept of who is actually designing, and what is the role of designers, and in particular in relation to innovation. A colleague of ours, Roberto Verganti, spoke about design-driven innovation, and he was referring to innovation that was playing between new meanings and new technologies. And specifically, he said that design-driven innovation is the innovation that is producing a radical change in the system of meaning. So it's starting from the system of meaning, which could also imply radical technological changes. This is has been also a very common definition of design-driven innovation. Roberto Verganti is probably known to many of you for this study on design-driven innovation. We found that in respect to this definition of design-driven innovation, we needed a different way of a new dimension. We needed this definition was bidimensional, and it was assuming that the design action was only performed by an expert, which was interpreting a reality. But in fact, if, as we said before, everybody is designing, everybody has the capability for designing, probably we should discuss what is the design agency, who is the agent of a design action. And so we generated a 3D. We turned this, we rotated this diagram, and we generated a 3D representation of the design action in which the design agency can be performed by expert designers, but it's also a diffuse capability, as Manzini was saying, as not only Manzini were saying. The perspective that acknowledged that everybody can design is in fact also generating a sort of tension, logical tension on this axis then between expert and diffuse design. And this tension is actually particularly relevant for us because it allows us to interpret and to understand what is the logic or allows us to link this question of design with a quite substantial conceptual shift that we had in service design and in service design literature in the last, I would say, 15 years. The conceptual shift is between a perspective that was looking at services as what products are not, and a logic that was looking at services as a value generating activity. Well, based on this definition, service are no longer defined for the difference from products, but they are based on the analysis of this value creation activity, value co-creation. And this was also changing. Oh, doesn't change slide anymore. This gap was also changing the conception of what is a product or how we should interpret a service, and in the so-called good dominant logic and in the service dominant logic. We were designing services as and if we consider just the action of expert designers, services or goods are something that is designed by an expert and provided to people. In the perspective, in the so-called service dominant logic, we understand value as the center of an activity that between one or more actors, two or more actors, I would say. But value is no longer a property of a good, or it is no longer a property of a project that is developed by an expert, but is something that is generated by the user, by the beneficiary of the service. To make an example, we could design a service before, like a bank, but according to this new logic, we understand a bank only in the moment in which the user starts using it. A bank is not a bank until the user enters into the bank. Otherwise, it's just a space ready for a function, but it's not a function. A bus is just a big box on wheels, moving on wheels, until the passenger enters and use the bus to move from one part to another part of the city. So according to this logic, we see the role of the beneficiary as extremely relevant, and we give a role to the beneficiary, to the user of the service. These logical shift changes some fundamental considerations in the profession of service designer. According to this new logic, as I said, the value is only produced when the beneficiary of a service aggregates resources. So when I enter into the bus, I aggregate my resources about my knowledge about where I am and where I want to go, how much traffic I expect there to be, my knowledge about the rules for using a bus, but also the material goods, the bus itself and the service of the bus. I aggregate this, and the value that I get from the bus service is the movement from A to B, from home to office. So this work of aggregation of resources is something that the user does, the beneficiary of the service does. And so the value production depends on the beneficiary. And in this logic, products are tools for value creation, in which some activities and knowledge are frozen. A bus is free as a frozen potential to be used as a service, but is not in a service. And such knowledge represents potential value, as I said before, that becomes real in the moment in which the beneficiary interacts with the service. Products, therefore, are just a distribution mechanism for such potential. And finally, if this is the logic, we understand that producers or service providers are no longer offering value, but value proposition. And the value, in fact, happens when the beneficiary aggregates those resources. So this table is somehow putting together, is taken from a paper by Vargo and Loesch, and is putting together some components of this logical gap between the way of thinking of service as goods, as something finished and designed by an expert designer or a service provider, and the service dominant logic in which the role of the customer is changing, is no longer passive, but the customer becomes a co-producer of value. And value is no longer determined by in the good or in the service that was provided, but it depends on how it is perceived, and so it is determined by the customer. And the role of goods, as I said, is not to have value in se, but to transmit, to pass some value potential, and the customers become active, whereas firms can only make value propositions. What is the role of service designer in this shift? The expert service designer. The service designer facilitates value co-production. The term facilitating came out also in your answer to my question. Facilitates value co-production by providing a logical infrastructure that could be the organization or the material infrastructure that the service beneficiary then aggregates together with other own personal resources. And we call this activity infrastructuring the activity of the service design. We call it is infrastructuring. And the interaction, of course, this activity of infrastructure can happen by a direct interaction of service designer with some users. And this happens in cases of design activism, or when designers personally participate to the value production processes, for instance, in some social innovation processes, or it can be indirect when some designing material products or immaterial components like services are generated by a service designer to engage the beneficiary. And like, for instance, when service designer work on interfaces, visualization, scenarios, or prototypes. What changes is only also the way to interpret the approach to the activity of service designers, because when you understand that if the process of designing is to deliver something with an intrinsic value, so once we deliver this value, the process is finished. So in the so-called good nominal logic, the approach is closed. Is based has been defined by I don't remember actually who this table is not mine, of course, but I didn't put the source. I promise I will put it, but it's been defined as project-based approach. It's a closed process, a process with a beginning and an end. But if the service designer is facilitating processes, then we should understand the action of service designer as an open process in which the duration of this process depends on how the customer aggregates the resources and their disposal. The value, as I mentioned, is created by the beneficiary, is no longer embedded in a product or service. And of course, you understand that the expert service designer or also the service provider do not have the full control over the results. We have several cases. This is a way also of interpreting, for instance, several cases in which the service designer was supposing a certain behavior, and the users actually had another behavior. These are cases in which cases of fail of service design activity. I would just mention, for instance, when here in Denmark, the check-in, check-out system was proposed in the buses. It was the designer of that service was supposing that people could understand and adapt very easily to this system of checking in when entering in the bus and checking out when coming out of the bus. In fact, people were not used to that at all, and they always forgot to check out. And in fact, the company which was managing this probably was living not too much on the price of the ticket that was paid, but on the fines that were given to people when forgetting to check out. So the control over the results is not what is supposed to be. The description of the results also are different, because we in schools teach our students that they should describe services as with technical drawings, with rendering blueprints. And this is I'm not saying that this is a not correct way of representing services, because they are representing what should happen in the service, but they are not prescriptive. They are just, they should probably be presented together with scenarios of interaction or experience prototypes or something that visualize and gives a perspective on how the service could be used. Just passing the concept or the idea of the service to the beneficiary, because it is the beneficiary then actually interpret what we are creating for them and works in the value co-production. So I hope that with this first part, I managed to explain what I mean with this perspective gap. The second issue, the second topic of my presentation is concerning the map. So if the value is co-produced, we have a question emerging here. What is the logical territory in which designers are working? We mentioned that our starting point was Herbert Simon. Everybody designs who devise a course of action that improves the present situation that changes the present situation in a better one. This means that design is a normal everyday activity, and that human beings perform, and that is related to change and to problem solving. Sometimes this activity is performed as a routine, of course. I mean, like taking a bus, as I mentioned before, driving to work, shopping in the usual supermarket. We do not need to think too much on those operations. We don't even define those operations as design, because we have learned a set of procedures to perform there. It's a practice. But there are cases in which we face different situation of context. I mean, many of you probably knows the kind of thinking that we have when blocked in a traffic jam, or some of you have noticed their own capability to understand where are some goods when entering in a supermarket that has never been seen before. When you are in a new supermarket, you more or less know that you will find I don't know, the toothpaste together with products for personal hygiene or something similar, where the fruit and the vegetable together. So we know more or less how to find our orientation, even when we do not know where we are. And this is somehow the beginning of what we can define as a design action, even though it is not exactly, I wouldn't define it as a design action, but we are actually trying to devise a course of action that will bring us to a solution. In other cases, though, we cannot solve the problem, and we need an expert to help me to solve my problem. And this is probably another territory. How do we? Is there a territory in which designers can work to support that first action of problem solving? Is there a territory that design can support, in which design can support action when there must be an interaction between a person with a problem and a infrastructure that solve the problem? And so you understand that there are several different situations. In the book, we identified 3 different levels. One level is what we is the level of value creation in use. So we say that value is co-produced by users in the moment in which they come in contact with a number of resources and they aggregate resources. So a first level is focusing on people's own problem solving. For instance, if I feel sick, I have my own personal resources to solve my problem. I recognize some symptoms, I know headache, and I take a tablet for headache. I know, therefore, what to do, what kind of tablet to get. I know something about the medicine I'm taking. If I don't know, I have another resource that is still personal, a personal resource. I can ask someone, I can ring my friend and say, oh, do you know what I can do for my headache or for my belly ache? So this is something that I can solve, that people can solve with their own resource. And at this level, what happens is that people are actually interacting with a number of products and services or people, and exercising their own diffuse design, their own design capability, which is a diffuse design capability. If my disease, to continue with this example, is more serious, and I don't know how, I don't have enough knowledge to get rid of the cause of my disease, I can use a service. That means I take the phone and I ring a doctor, or I consult an app, or I go online and search what can facilitate my healing process. Because the doctor will tell me what to do. The doctor, the app, the web page are part of an infrastructure that has been created to support my self-healing process, sorry. And of course, this may not be enough, because if I really feel bad, I need an hospital. And an hospital is an infrastructure that has been designed to treat me until I will feel better. This infrastructure has been designed as an organization, an interaction among different actors. So it's a much more complex infrastructure, a much more complex aggregation of resources that has been put together for me, because I put together actors, technologies, competences, and these, of course, require some design capabilities that are much more elaborated, complex than the capability I need to solve my own problem. So the value we are talking about in my healing process is either me finding my own solution, and so I am the value co-producer, or I can find my solution with the support of something that has been designed for me. And this is a second logical level. So far, we identified two logical levels for design intervention. The first refers to the support, my own capability to find my own solution. And the second is when I ask for help. And we were wondering whether, there is a role and a competence of designers that can actually work, not all, of course, it is quite obvious that designers can work in organizing the service with the doctor or the hospital. But we were wondering, is there any role for designers at the first level, the level in which value is created? Whereas, the second logical level is something that we've been working in the discipline of service design for a long time. One of my first projects was related to healthcare and design, so how service design could support the organization of an healthcare process, a healing process, not a healing, a treatment process for people with diabetes. There is a third logical level that is in this system, whether I can find a way to get better by myself or through an healthcare infrastructure. There is an institutional system around all these. And this institutional system is the one in which everybody operates, me as when finding my own solution, and the hospital. It consists in laws, knowledge, culture, rules, healing practice, whatever is known about my health problem. This system is also somehow designed. That means that there are different actors, institutions, politicians, doctors, governments, scientists, society that have shaped this system. I'm not suggesting that designers can directly change this system, but their action is part of the process of shaping the whole healthcare institutional system. And therefore, we should also understand what are the tools and what are the capabilities that designers need for at least working, having awareness that he or she is working also to change such a, there will be implication, I would say, of his action on these institutional systems. So these are the three levels: the level of interaction, in which designers operates in a condition of diffuse design, so it supports somehow diffuse design. The level of infrastructure, in which designers use their own expert capability to organize the infrastructure that will support value co-creation. And here the designer may have more control, of course. Well, in the first level, it is clearly a question of interaction with other actors that have their own rationalities. When working at the level of organization, there is the designer, the design action can be more prescriptive sometimes, because it concerns actions, procedures, processes that are sometimes must be prescriptive. And then there is a final level that concerns the institutional system, that includes rules and regulation, what I mentioned before. And at this level, designers cannot control the project, but can work on mechanism of replication, scalability, that eventually will impact on change at the institutional system. But if there are questions, please write them on the chat so we can discuss them. And then the third point of my presentation, we spoke about this perspective shift. We tried to map the territories in which this perspective shift will be placed. And what we need is a navigation tools that allows us to, in this case, service designers and those who are studying to become service designers, or those who work with service designers, to define the way they can work with such tools. Such navigation tools that could also be useful for those who want to employ service designers, to understand what they could expect from service designer. Such navigation tool should be used to find a way across different service design tools and toolkits. And when we wrote our book, we found out that we did not need to write another toolkit or a design manual, but we only needed something that could provide this critical view on of the capability that service designers are expected to develop, and the tools and the critical view on the tools that the service design could use. We were inspired by some literature that was trying to define those design capabilities. We were not the first ones to have this question of what are the design capabilities. But in particular, we were referring to service design capabilities. What are the capabilities that service designers should have? And we asked ourselves, what are those capabilities? Because they are the capabilities that a service designer should sell to their possible employees or clients. I mean, this is the capabilities that the service designer should claim to have if they want to find a job. This is the list of the capabilities. And they can, the question is, at this point, that you understand that we spoke about a map with different levels. So the interpretation of such capabilities should be, the capability should be mapped on the territory that that I described before. And I will try to do that in the following slides. First of all, what happens, or what are the capabilities that are needed when talking about interaction with the user in the moment in which value is generated. And we say that the designer may have a direct interaction with users, sometimes facilitating the interaction with people, engaging people, involving them in workshops or in design games. And in other cases, the designer is not talking with the users. Or she is just proposing some tools that is engaging users or is facilitating user activity. Here I put the picture of the IKEA catalog, which should be very familiar to everybody, but especially to you in Sweden. The IKEA catalog, I define it as a design manual for non-designers, because it gives a possibility for people that do not have the capability to understand what happens if I put two different materials together in a room. How do I put together some pieces of a furniture? And the catalog is actually helping them to figure out those properties. So it's sort of a design tool for those who do not have are not used to design. But also I put another example. This is a very old example. In 2005, I think, there was a work by Hilary Cotton, I think, in Bolton, to facilitate the interaction between people with diabetes and their doctor. And they designed some cards which were describing the various feelings or symptoms that people with diabetes could have, so that people with diabetes were entering in the doctor's room when knowing already what to ask, what to discuss with the doctor. And this was saving quite a lot of time in the I know the term in Italian, anamnesis. I don't know if it is. So the process of the doctor asking question to understand what the symptoms are. This is I mean, we in service design, we have been using cards in many other occasions. There are many other cases, but I put this one, which was probably one of the first ones. So what are the capabilities that service designers should claim to have in this context, at this logical level? The designer should be able to address the context, to understand the context in which he or she is working, to propose visions. I mean, the IKEA catalog is proposing visions, to engage stakeholders. So to make sure that stakeholders understand the game they are going to play. Also, capabilities to model, so to generate a vision or visualization of a reality that is not yet there, and which some of you also proposed and say that they were expecting designers to visualize something, and those visualization may happen through prototypes or through visual representation, of course. And also at this level, the designer should have a very strong capability to control aspects related to the experience, what the experience of a service could be.
Nicola, we have a question in the chat here. I think that might suit you for this.
Yes, yes, now I can see them, actually, two.
For me as a practitioner, this feels quite complex in my practice. What would you say are main takeaways for a service designer, or is the value mostly for academic research?
Practitioner, design practitioner, I suppose. What would you say are the main takeaways for service designer, or it is? I would say this is not. I don't see it as as too complex. Probably the explanation was too complex, but at the end of the day, is about trying to understand and to reflect and to have a critical view about what should I do? What should my critical behavior be when addressing a context, when engaging people and so on. Is not otherwise, you know, I would just interact with people or invent some tools, but what do I want to do with those people? What do I want to do? What do I want those people I'm interacting with to take from my contribution? And so I must understand that what I'm proposing are visions. I'm visualizing something that is not yet there. I'm trying to engage them, because if I visualize this something that is not yet there, they will probably understand how the service works. So somehow this is a way of having you know, stepping back on my everyday activities in which I can use tools. I mean, for a design practitioner will probably work every day on journeys, blueprints, on or you know, creating tools for people to engage people and so on. This reflection here is like stepping back and saying, okay, what I'm useful for? I mean, what is that I'm contributing with? I don't know whether this answer to the question. In the meantime, there is a question from Keller. Are there specific competence needed for a designer working with public sector system design, such as understanding the political system, political structure, political decision-making process? This is something that comes in the next slide, because it concerns, in my opinion, the role of design when working with institutional systems. I mentioned before the third of my levels, of the level I was suggesting. But there are also, I would say that I found that some designers working in the public sector were probably more engaged with people. So the competence that that concern facilitation, vision building, engaging stakeholders and modeling, prototyping, for instance, they are competence that more often are used by designers that are working in the public sector and are working with people. There is another question. I find myself assuming that this is it's within the role of infrastructural services such as hospitals or public healthcare to delegate value to interaction, and in healthcare to self-care, peer care, community care, or at least source value and data from those interactions. But I feel sometimes that healthcare feels it's outside their domain. It is possible that value production in its domain might better be developed at a systemic or cultural level, and that it might be misguided to assume that the traditional public healthcare needs to be the source of legitimacy in this value expansion. I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly. of course, the healthcare sector has there is a part of the healthcare sector in which services must be the activity of service design or anyway of organizing a service must be prescriptive, because if something goes wrong, I mean, the designer or the service provider has to have a control over what is happening. We were working with the blood bank, and of course, the procedure for going to the blood bank, picking up some blood, and going to the patient must be prescriptive, must be exactly, well described, because if I take the wrong blood bag, I can kill the patient. So in those conditions, service design is a prescriptive activity that has to be developed together with, of course, the hospital personnel. But there are many other activities that in which the healthcare system would actually benefit from giving more assuming that the patient, for instance, is not a passive receiver of a service, is active. And I think, well, I know that Experio is working very much on healthcare, so probably you are much more expert than me in mentioning cases in which, especially I'm thinking of the area of social diseases, but many other cases probably, cases in which it is obvious that if I engage the patient, and if I support his or her own capability to handle a certain situation that in most cases also implies some emotional issues, the service that the healthcare system can provide is much better. So I'm not sure that I understand the last part of the question. It might be misguided to assume that the traditional public healthcare needs to be source of legitimacy in this value expansion. I don't think that the public healthcare system would lose legitimacy if they acknowledge the role of the patient in their in the healing process, because actually I think they're and not working in this area, but I think there are also scientific studies that demonstrate that the involvement of the patient is relevant, is very relevant for certain procedures and certain diseases. So I don't think that that there is any loss of legitimacy of the system. Is just an improvement of its efficiency. And I don't know if I answered the question exactly. Could an example be that I, as a practitioner, understanding that when they ask for a blueprint, what they actually ask for or maybe need is not a blueprint, but a visualization or suggestion of scenarios? Yeah, I mean, the blueprint is a sort of a specification of a scenario, a specification of something that that is should happen for the service to be organized in a certain way. And of course, is a specification that has a number of indication of technical or a specific indication about who should do what and at what time and what kind of interaction there should be between the actors. So it's a very detailed specification, but the fact that it is detailed doesn't mean that it should be interpreted as prescriptive. As I mentioned before, in some cases, like in the healthcare system, those specifications must be prescriptive. But there are other cases in which what I'm describing is a scenario in which I'm telling, I cannot tell the patient what to do, but I can suggest the patient what is the best process within that kind of functionality of a service. I don't know. There is a okay. There are 10 minutes left to the end, and this was sent already 2 minutes ago. So I suppose 8 minutes left. I would go quickly on the other 2 levels, and to specify the capabilities that a service designer is supposed to have. The level of what we define as the level of infrastructuring, the level in which the design works and organize a mechanism, people, technology, knowledge, and in the backstage, they make sure that the service experience will be planned. This is also important. I mean, many times I've seen that people people understand the service design is only about the experience, but this is true. It is true that a customer experience a service in a certain way, and this is crucial for the success of the service, but it's also true that the designer has to organize this complex mechanism that is behind the scenes. And for this, and for doing these, designers need to some capabilities that we identified as building logical architecture, so understanding how the structure of the service works and how the various components are staying together. Vision building, addressing the vision building, providing a vision of what should be done. Of course, addressing the context, and also the capability to work in an open way, or open problem solving. And I just mentioned before in my comments to the question what this means. Finally, the question of working at the institutional level. Here we are talking about whether the designer can change the institutional landscape. And here, also addressing the question from Keller, is the designer, how can the design address issues that are sometimes also political? And I would argue that design and designers are not just technicals, they are political. They address whatever they do as a political meaning. But the question is, can we define some capabilities that designers should have to address those political institutional changes? Can we provoke the change, or can we understand the impact that our activity will have on such changes? There are, I mean, it is quite unusual for, I would say, for designers to try to work at this level, but most recently there have been some attempts. In the book we defined, we spoke about the change of the taxation system in Australia, but more recently, after the book, I would say, we saw the studies on the 15-minute city, for instance, which was the study that supported the election of the mayor of Paris in the last election. These are projects that are based on missions, so they are based on broad vision of what our society should look like, what our system should be like. And now the European programs are also based on vision, on missions, and so these design capabilities somehow becoming part of the culture of in the system. But the capabilities that specific capabilities that designers can actually have or propose are, of course, vision building, also working across different logical levels, because I don't have an example here, but I've seen example of missions. Mariana Mazzucato, which is the person who introduced this concept of mission, was explaining that one mission, for instance, could be to make cities free from private cars. And she explained the mission. I found that she's an economist. A designer would have described the same mission, going into the details of how services are organized, car sharing is organized, how the charging system is organized. So the designer has this ability to work from the mission to the practical and organizational level. And of course, the designer has the capability to address the context and also to propose models of reality. So to at this level, I mean, it's not the same kind of models that we can propose when working with people, when prototyping with people, but it is still there are still examples that like examples of how this 15-minute city is being experimented in various parts in Europe. I'm thinking about Barcelona, for instance. Here, this is a part of the designer's modeling capability. And very shortly, I decided to a conclusion that I would just to point out that I decided to address this question of the service design capability because I'm instinctively opposing to a view that professional capability of service design can be acquired simply by toolkits or sometimes quick service design courses. I think also many of my colleagues are trying to not to banalize the concept of service design and to reduce it, not to reduce it to what had happened for design thinking, a buzzword and a quick fix for some companies that needed to become more creative. And I think this focus on capabilities rather than on tools makes us, puts us in the condition to understand the tools and to connect the tools and the toolkit to a more critical view of a geography of design action. And with this, I conclude my presentation.